after we began our ministry, my husband began to call me the skunk at the garden party. And I say to you now, I am the skunk at the high tea.
I'm checking and testing, checking, testing, checking, testing, checking, testing.
I love to start with sharing this particular quote from C.S. Lewis because I really love it. He says, "There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Next to the blessed sacrament itself, your neighbor is the holiest object presented to your senses." How's that? So the person you're sitting next to now is like the holiest object presented to your senses. Isn't that amazing? And that is very much the message that we want our Foundlings Abortion Memorial Quilt to convey. I hope that you each take a moment to wander over there and look at our quilt, because every human being is a holy reflection of our Creator. We call it the Foundlings Abortion Memorial Quilt, and that word foundlings, you may be familiar with that word. It refers to children when a mom can't care for her baby and she leaves it on the doorstep of somebody who can. And those of us who have had abortions, basically, we abdicated our parenting opportunity and we left our babies on God's doorstep. So what we've got here in this Foundlings Abortion Memorial Quilt is that using my arts training, I draw a child every day. Today is day number 906. And the reason I do that is not only to honor the 2.654 billion children who have been lost to abortion in the last 60 years worldwide, but more specifically because the child that my husband and I aborted 40 years ago or so was really key to bringing us to receive and accept the forgiveness that was offered through Jesus. The guilt that a parent feels toward their child that they've aborted is a very unique kind of guilt. It's a guilt that cries out and says, "How could I have done this to you, my own child? How could you ever forgive me?" So the post-abortive mother and father may find themselves not only struggling to accept the forgiveness of Jesus, but thinking that there is a child that they have wronged, and that particular guilt can be very stinging and paralyzing. But God used our child almost as an ambassador of His grace and forgiveness when it finally dawned on me that where that little girl is, there is no unforgiveness. She's sitting in the lap of Jesus. Amen. Is there room for unforgiveness in the lap of Jesus? Is there room for condemnation? I don't think there is. And when I finally got that through my head and my heart, I was able to accept what was offered: full forgiveness and release from guilt. Prepare a Room Ministries exists to magnify God and to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ with a focus on offering the healing work of the cross to those hurt by abortion. This is our hope, is that the ministry of this quilt, these foundlings, are acting as what we call we ambassadors of God's grace and forgiveness. And we hope that they convey a message to those who are hurting from abortion. And the message is, come, be healed, be embraced, be forgiven. We hear a lot of stories in our ministry. I'm sure you guys hear a lot of stories in caring for women. A woman from a country that has one of the highest rates of abortion in the world, who had multiple abortions, botched so gruesomely that she was left infertile, mourning not only her lost children, but the prospect of future motherhood. The mom, whose daughter told her she had just taken the abortion pill, and that mom rushed around trying to find a doctor to prescribe the abortion pill, reversal pill, while her daughter couldn't make up her mind as to whether she was going to take the follow-up abortion pill to finish the job or take the reversal pill. And she finally opted for the reversal pill and became a mother. The couple that turned to in vitro fertilization because they couldn't get pregnant, the woman was determined to remain hopeful in spite of repeated disappointments as the implantations slipped away and the money thinned out. As you know, probably, IVF is very expensive. Amid the overwhelm of logging her cycle and going in for appointments and testing in numbers, she holds most precious the brief spans of time when she was unmistakably pregnant. The grieving wife shedding tears for the traumatic stress she sees in her husband from an abortion he was involved with long before he met her. The cult, whose charismatic leader decided one day that there would be no more children born into that cult. He required not only that the men get vasectomies, but the women abort their children. Those parents were left with the agonizing choice of leaving their beloved community or aborting their children, and many aborted. The woman who stepped into the restroom and suffered a miscarriage while attending a performance of the Nutcracker at the San Francisco Ballet. The elderly woman who confessed on her deathbed that she had been haunted by a secret abortion she'd had as a young woman. The young man whose girlfriend aborted his child without consulting him, causing him not only grief but a feeling of powerlessness and emasculation. But I have one different kind of story in mind today. I'm thinking of one particular story that was unusual for me to hear. It's the story of a nurse who worked in the OB/GYN department of a major hospital in a major American city. And as part of her work, she had to be involved in some abortions. And she hated that. And I think it traumatized her. I think it really wounded her. She finally couldn't do it anymore and she quit. But she came to me after reading my book, earnestly seeking God because of her inability to look with compassion on post-abortive women. The ickiness of abortion had, in a sense, traumatized her to the point that it seemed in her eyes to stick onto these women and all women who've had abortions. And she couldn't find a way to love them. She understood that this was a spiritual struggle she was going through, and she wanted to love them, but she could not. She said, my book helped, but she still struggles today. Which brings me to Caring for Women Center. Their mission, as Heidi reminded you all, is to surround people with the love of God and empower them in unplanned pregnancies to choose life. Listen to those words. Surround people with the love of God. That is no small thing. When my husband Jerry and I embarked on this ministry, we knew we were entering the territory of icky. Abortion is icky. It's not something anybody wants to talk about. And the ickiness is kind of like the smell of a skunk. It clings to you, it's hard to wash off, and it's repulsive. People don't want to go near it. In fact, after we began our ministry, my husband began to call me the skunk at the garden party. And I say to you now, I am the skunk at the high tea. Because I was tasked with talking to perfectly respectable people who have kept their mouths shut and their eyes on the ball about something so repulsive and icky that a lot of people just want to run and hide. I've been in situations where I've been on this podium and nobody will look at me. They're all just, they don't want to make eye contact with me because abortion is icky. That's the technical term. What can wash away skunk odor? And more importantly, for my friend who was challenged in learning to love the post-abortive, how can we as Christians overcome our natural repulsion response to the sin of abortion? I love to tell the story of my 2 abortion appointments because they are stories of God, God's goodness and His grace. They're wonderful stories, and I'm going to tell them to you now. I was a young feminist, well-trained by the surrounding culture to consider abortion a woman's right to choose. So when my boyfriend and I got pregnant, I made the appointment very casually, and I was actually almost excited about it because I knew that I was entering into that rite of passage, that signature woman's experience that would define me as being one of the club, in the club. But I can tell you that the moment that the abortion took place, I was completely transformed. I went into shock, and I went into a realization that my whole world was based on a lie, and it shattered all around me, instantly, instantaneously, the very moment. I walked out, and I went down the steps and went to my car, and my eyes were brimming with tears because I was utterly broken. I walked toward my car, and oddly, I saw something very colorful on the floor, on the ground of the parking lot right outside the door of my car. So being even in the worst moments, I'm a treasure hunter, what can I say? I stooped down and I picked it up, and I looked to see what this thing was that was sitting there right there outside the door of my car. And I had to blink back the tears because I could hardly see it. But what I saw was a very old, rusty, dented lapel pin from some ancient birthday party with a picture on it of a mother bird with her wings stretched over her chicks and the words, "He careth for you." In the particulars of that dark moment, I recognized that God was speaking to me. I didn't know God. I didn't know who He was. I didn't know His character, and I had never encountered Him before. But yet, because there was biblical language there, somehow I made the connection that God was speaking to me, and I took it very personally. He was extending Himself to assure me that He cared about what I was going through. He was the personal answer to the deep trauma of that moment. And I want to just say something, going back to caring for women and their mission to surround all people with the love of God. That I had literally just minutes before had an abortion. But His message to me was not one of condemnation. His message was a message of caring. Did everybody hear that? He did not wag His finger at me. He did not condemn me. He had deep compassion for me. He told me that He cared for me. Well, call us slow learners. We were in almost precisely the same situation again, just a few months later. I was pregnant again, and I made my second abortion appointment. The night before the appointment, my then boyfriend was sick all night with vomiting and diarrhea, almost as though somebody were trying to tell him something. But he didn't quite get the message. We were in Corpus Christi at this time, and one of the things that made this appointment different from the first one is that I noticed there were these people outside. They were doing something funny. They were kind of huddled together with their hands like this and kind of mumbling to themselves. What in the world were they doing? Anybody know? They were praying for me. Did they talk to me? No. Did they yell at me? No. Did they hold up a sign? No. Did they show me pictures of aborted fetuses? No. Did they even say, your baby has fingernails? No. All they did was stand there and pray. I went inside and I paid my $100. Jerry waited in the car. And the next interesting thing happened, which was that my appointment was delayed by a full hour. And I sat there alone in the waiting room of the abortion clinic for an hour, and I changed my mind. Funny thing was, something was happening to Jerry in the car, too. He came running in. You didn't do it, did you? Let's get out of here. And I may be the only person who can make this claim. My husband proposed to me in the abortion clinic parking lot. It's a great story, isn't it? Because God intervened both times. God intervened both times. That boy that was in my tummy at that time that almost perished is now a 39-year-old father of 6. That boy loves Jesus so much. He's raising his children to love Jesus. And then with some purposeful intention, we went on and conceived and bore a daughter. And she has 6 children and loves Jesus. So we are a living example of how the Lord restores what's lost. And he does it for us 12-fold. I'll just say 100-fold, because truly it's uncountable, the blessings that we have experienced since then. What is the remedy for the lady I told you about who can't love the post-abortive? We know that God does perfectly and completely what we can only do poorly and in part. He reminds us in Romans 5:5, the love of God is poured out within our hearts through the Holy Spirit who is given to us. Jesus, by his Spirit, makes us able to love the unlovable, to love the sinner, to love the woman who chose to have an abortion. If God is ready to embrace her, why aren't we? Where we are empty, he fills us. The Caring for Women Center has post-abortive services, extending that idea of surrounding people with the love of God to those of us who made ourselves particularly icky by our abortion decisions. Our book is a little bit different from the one that they're using. This one was written in the hopes that people who don't know Jesus can be wooed in. It doesn't have churchy language, and it doesn't really dwell on a lot of scriptures, although chapter 9 is a full gospel message. This is the kind of thing that you can give to them, and they take it in the room, and they close the door and do it in the privacy of their own time and their own space. But what about the icky? What about the icky? What about that bad skunk smell that sticks to you? What about sin? Is it still sticking to me? Can you smell it on me? I don't think you can. I have been forgiven. And the fragrance that is on me and on all sinners who have submitted their sins to the cleansing power of Jesus is, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians, a fragrance of Christ to God among those who are being saved and among those who are perishing. To the one, an aroma from death to death. To the other, an aroma from life to life. Thank you.